Ken.
Okay, so a very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for making time for this event this afternoon. This is a part of the series in the program to enable the environment for sustainable agribusinesses in our sub-region. This afternoon's program will be done in two parts. The first session will be on policy and regulation in the sector and the energy agricultural nexus, and it will be followed by access to financing. So again, you're welcome. My name is Harriet Mr. Arthur. I'm the executive partner of Arthur Energy Advisors. I have worked in the energy sector for the past 30 years. I've done some utility work. I've also worked for almost 10 years in the development sector. I'm very excited to be part of this program, and I look forward to working with you all to make it a great success. Now, I will quickly call on the stand-in for the director of ICRI to give us a welcome word so that we can proceed with the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harriet, for the welcome, and thank you for being part of this. Dear participants, it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Mr. Basaho, Executive Director of ICRI, who couldn't be here today. As you know, agriculture is the #1 purveyor of employment in our region. In many countries, up to 70% of the population is involved in the agriculture sector. The region is endowed with great potential in terms of agricultural land, in terms of human resources. However, the potential for growth in the agriculture is hindered by several barriers. Chief among those barriers are the lack of sound policy and regulatory framework, lack of access to finance, and also lack of technical expertise. In order to remove these barriers, we are pleased to announce that our collaboration with the Water for Energy for Food is going to focus on moving the policy dialogue for it to be more conducive to private sector investment and promotion of innovation in the agriculture sector, and making sure that we can support research and development and link research to the private sector. And finally, that we are able to support knowledge sharing and technology transfer to ensure that we no longer have an agriculture sector fully dependent on rain-fed irrigation, fully dependent on a market that is usually fragmented, and also an agriculture where post-harvest loss can reach up to 40% in some value chains. These are the key issues that we must try to address as a community in order to be able to feed our growing population using less water and more energy efficient technologies for a resilient agriculture. In these words, I would like to conclude by saying that as a region and as a representative of the 15 member states, ICRI is fully engaged in making sure that the water and energy for food is a successful program in the region. And we are sure that the member states will be fully behind our activities in order to make sure that we can coordinate better, we can put in place sound policy and regulatory framework, and we can build the capacity of innovators and entrepreneurs in our region so that our agriculture can be successful, sound, and can feed our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Siri, for your welcome words. I think Siri has set the ball rolling for our session. In this session, we're going to have a few presentations. We are initially going to have the keynote address from Mr. Kemo, the Director of Energy in Gambia. He's going to join us and give us a keynote address. And then we have a couple of presentations to listen to. So ladies and gentlemen, I will call on Mr. Kemo to deliver his keynote address.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I thank the representative of the Executive Director, participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be invited to this virtual seminar on energy, water, energy, and food as a keynote speaker. I first of all have to thank the organizers for choosing this important topic for mankind. As we all know, water, energy, and food are basic needs of mankind and are necessary for poverty reduction and sustainable development. The three sectors are definitely linked in many ways and therefore impact on one another. For us to have any meaningful development to happen in any one of these sectors, the other two sectors must be equally developed. Essentially, we're saying that the three sectors must be developed together for us to achieve what we call water, energy, and food security. However, to achieve these noble goals of food security, energy, and water in our countries, I mean West Africa for that matter, we would need critical collaboration between the political authorities and the private sector to develop the necessary, market for clean energy food nexus that's necessary to support this food security. As we all know, energy is very critical for food production and processing. So as we mentioned, there should be a clear collaboration between political authorities and private sector for this to happen. In this collaboration, each of the parties have their respective roles to ensure that we have efficient, affordable, and reliable clean energy that will propel our food production and processing. But how do we achieve this collaboration of providing affordable, adequate, and efficient energy? The government is the political authority, the private sector is there. We need the policies and regulatory framework to ensure that the direction that government sets is very clear. And it's not only clear, but it's supportive to any investor that is coming. Also, we need a clear or robust regulatory framework that will ensure all players free and fair, participation, because we need clean energy to be able to produce and process our food. But then how do we deliver this clean energy? It could be delivered through via two systems, either on grid or off grid. So we have to look at how we deliver this energy to these food production and processing centers. Most of them are in rural areas where in our countries, maybe the grid have not arrived. So for us to deliver this clean energy to them, it means we need some kind of off-grid system. And there are two types of off-grid system, home system or mini-grid. But as far as supporting productive activity is concerned with energy, I think it will be a grid mini-grid that we can use as clean energy system to support the food production and processing. So government need to come and develop that framework that will provide assurance to the investors to invest in clean energy production to support food production and processing. What we mean by the regulatory framework is to have clear laws, to have tariff model, is to have standards for installation of these mini grids, and is also to have financial support mechanism, because we know that these green mini grids sometimes they are not very viable when they are not implemented to certain scales compared to the grid. And if the costs are expensive, it will serve as a deterrent. So in as much as government can provide the policy and the necessary regulatory framework, they also need to provide that necessary support that can bridge the tariff gap between the mini grids and the national grid, so that the mini grid operators will have the incentive to invest and supply power to our food production and processing centers. When we talk about the collaboration, we are also thinking about private sector coming in. What do we expect from them? They'll have to come and invest in clean energy. Most of the time, the food producers cannot invest in clean energy or cannot invest in energy because that's not their specialty. So you realize that we need a special group of investors, these are energy entrepreneurs also, who need to come and invest in clean energy. So once the regulatory framework is there, the policy is very clear, and the necessary financial support is also there, the incentive is already there from the private sector to come in and invest in this clean energy. It can either be on grid or off grid. But as we are talking about food production here, as most of our fields are in off grid area, we are most likely looking at green mini grid to be the system that can deliver that clean energy that will power our food production centers and processing centers. I don't want to take a lot of your time since there is limited time, but as far as our countries are concerned, I think this is the way to go. Since food security, it should be a very important priority for any country in the region. So, for that matter, government need to take up this regulatory process very seriously and provide that political commitment to the whole process. Once the political commitment is there, the policy is very clear, the regulatory framework is developed and it's adhered to, then definitely the private sector will be willing to invest in clean energy. And if that's there, we will definitely also have food production promoted well. Of course, these energy systems are also not developed in isolation. Once we want to develop them, we have to make it a comprehensive program to make sure they are linked to so many other things, because the more users we have, productive users of energy for that matter, the more viable the systems can become. We don't only set up these energy systems for food production. We link it up with communities, with households, with a lot of other users, so that the viability of the energy systems will be enhanced. But if it is not viable, they cannot continue to operate, and therefore, when they don't operate, they don't supply power, then the food production and processing efforts will suffer. This is what I have for you for now, and I thank the organizers for inviting me, and I thank everybody, and I wish the program well. At the Gambia here, we are actually also doing the mini-grid program, and our target is not only to supply power to the household, but we develop this framework to make sure that we also attract productive use of power from these systems. These are going to be horticultural garden, rice fields, and other food production centers, which are all going to be connected to these mini grids to supply them power, so that the food production will be increased. So I wish the program success, and Gambia would want to be informed about how the program is going, so that if we need to participate, we can also participate in the program. I thank all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cisse, for your address. I think it was very informative. I think listening to both Siri and Mr. Cisse, the emphasis of the need for water and energy for food production, and how critical it is in the sub-region to increase our production to be able to feed our people. I think that we're all ready to see how we can support this program to make a contribution towards addressing the gaps we still have in the system. I think one of the important things that the Director for Energy from Gambia emphasized was the fact that we're going to need policy and regulation support, especially from governments. And I'm happy that ECRI is here listening in, so that they see how the systems and structures we put in place are effective, so that we can have that collaboration for things to move on. Having worked in the sector for a while, I have noticed that some of the discussions we are having today are not new. I want us, as we go forward, to see how we do things differently, so that we can move the situation forward and not continue to have the same discussions every time. So with that, I will call on our first presenter to Arai Monteforte. Did I mention the name right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. So we're going to have a presentation from Arai, and he's presenting on the policy and regulation requirements for clean energy, for being able to optimize the contribution of clean energy in agriculture in our region. And we're so happy to have him here. He's a renewable energy expert, and we will be grateful. We are ready to listen to him. Oh, it's a she, sorry. My attention has been drawn to the fact that it's a she. I'm sorry. So we're ready to listen to her presentation. Thank you so much. You have the floor, Arai.
Sounds good. Do you see my presentation?
Yep.
Excellent. I'm going to turn on the camera so that there's no confusion. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for this space.
And hi, Arai, I can see your face.
Excellent. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Arai Monteforte, and I am an energy sector director at Tetra Tech, and one of the authors of this guide, Navigating Policy and Regulation in the Clean Energy Agriculture Nexus. Powering Agriculture and Energy Grant Challenge was a grant program that supported 24 clean energy agriculture innovators, developing solutions for smallholder farmers in developing countries. The Powering Agriculture team observed that Innovators met several policy and regulatory barriers that hindered scaling up operations, securing partnerships, and expanding to new countries. And this impacted them in meeting their grant milestones, which were not necessarily part of our program. But we started noticing that there were few platforms that existed for innovators to, one, voice their concerns, and two, to engage with policymakers and other government bodies to express these concerns. So based on this, the idea of a policy round paper came about. And so we convened clean energy agriculture stakeholders to document these pain points and to identify potential solutions. And we focused on 3 technologies: solar water pumping, cold storage, and agro-processing. And all our findings are summarized in this guide. To collect data, we first conducted 32 interviews of innovators, nonprofits, donors, and other stakeholders working in the clean energy agriculture nexus in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And this took place in the spring and summer of 2019. Innovators covered many topics in their interviews, including government policies and regulations, subsidies, customs and tariffs, product quality standards, and industry associations. And so this helped us set the scene for a roundtable event. In September 2019, we held a roundtable event in Nairobi, Kenya, that convened more than 30 innovators, government of Kenya representatives, regional renewable energy associations, national associations from Tanzania and Uganda, and other stakeholders to validate the interview findings and to identify ways forward. Now, based on the data we collected and validated during the interviews and roundtable event, we group concerns and identify 4 key policy and regulation categories. The first was promoting ease of business operations, stimulating market growth, recognizing and rewarding quality, and strengthening private sector government partnerships, which was very much highlighted by Mr. Cisse. These priorities became the focus of the guide, for which we documented the relevant barriers that innovators experience in each priority area, specific examples of the barriers that they were experiencing, recommendations for policymakers to address these barriers, and insights of successful actions that could be looked into to address these barriers. So I will summarize some of these points for each priority area. The first priority that we identified was promoting ease of business operations. Innovators highlighted 3 primary barriers, of which I will cover 2. Innovators found that their imported product components often received inconsistent application of customs and tariffs. And such problems with paperwork caused delays and storage fees at ports. Both innovators and government officials at the roundtable agreed that it was necessary to work with customs and revenue authorities to develop transparent tools and informational resources on products defined as clean energy agriculture products, and to train customs and border agents to apply correct tariffs at borders. Innovators also noted limited access to hard currency and foreign investment. A key concern for many companies is the ability to access hard currency to buy product stock and other services from abroad, and then repatriate it to repay international investors. And central bank regulations and lengthy procedures can dramatically affect business operations. So, for example, a cold storage innovator in Nigeria noted that transferring and exchanging money from foreign currency into local currency can be a lengthy process and hinder the company's growth. The ask on this aspect was to streamline policies and regulations related to access to foreign currency. And if foreign forex is capped or highly regulated, make clean energy agriculture sector of equipment exempt. The policy paper also gathers a few insights or examples of programs that governments or donors have put in place to address barriers. An example on this specific priority is Kenya's One Window Import Framework, which includes harmonized systems codes or HS codes for solar water pumps and refrigerators, which can provide definition for clean energy agriculture products. The second priority that we covered was stimulating market growth, under which there were 4 primary barriers, and I will cover 3 of them. First, innovators noted high customs and tariff duties. Many clean energy agriculture products cost several $100s, placing them out of reach for rural smallholder farmers. Research recently published by one of our partners, CLASP, quantified that import duties and VAT in particular account for over 30% of total system costs for off-grid refrigerators. So in this aspect, the ask was to put in place reductions and exemptions on import duties, tariffs, and VAT for clean energy agriculture products. On smart subsidies to lower end user costs, a few innovators noted that they have not been able to achieve a price point that makes their products truly accessible to the smallholder farmer markets that they're trying to serve. And they noted that the lack of smart, well-designed subsidies is a barrier. Innovators noted, for example, that the abrupt removal of a subsidy may cause price jumps that then negatively impact the willingness to pay of smallholder farmers. So in this aspect, the ask was to design private sector friendly, smart subsidy programs that are time-bound with clear exit strategies and tailored to consumer needs. One example that was mentioned by many was results-based financing as a viable solution. Market awareness of energy agriculture was another barrier. In nascent markets, the private sector is often forced to educate farmers about the benefits of mechanization, clean energy technologies, mobile banking, etc. And this can place burdens on them. They mentioned that governments can more credibly and effectively deliver such market information as a public good. So innovators asked both from governments and donors to fund market awareness programs, including technology demonstrations, trainings, extension work, and other outreach. So a few government actions have been put in place to address these barriers. I'm just going to mention one example. Earlier this year, Senegal introduced a VAT exemption for all off-grid solar PV products. What was interesting is that it covers solar water pumps, but cold storage and agro-processing technologies are covered under agricultural sector exemptions. And this is consistent with some of the concerns that have been seen across the countries where our innovators operate. The third priority was recognizing and rewarding quality. This one sought to balance the need for consumers to understand how to differentiate high quality products from low quality ones, but also the concern that prematurely placed standards can add financial burdens and restrict product innovation. So innovators place more interest in labeling for consumer awareness to educate consumers on how to assess performance and quality versus cost. So in terms of some insights to look into, I can mention the Global Leap Awards. This is a competitive award program that tests and recognizes high-quality energy appliances, including solar water pumps, refrigerators, and pressure cookers. The fourth and final category that we identified was strengthening private sector government partnerships. Again, this is something that Mr. Sase highlighted quite eloquently. Several innovators noted the need to better communicate the value of services they provide to farmers and governments. However, they did not feel that they were best placed, both in terms of resources and credibility, to articulate the benefits of clean technologies with respect to traditional ones. So the ask both from governments and donors was to produce data-driven research on costs and benefits for policymakers to use. And in fact, this was also a request from policymakers who wanted to have a better idea of the benefits and costs of different programs that have been used. And one example is the Powering Agriculture website, which hosts a number of resources, such as reports by the Food and Agriculture Organization that outline the cost and benefits of government interventions for solar water pumps and cold storage and biodigesters. There's also often a disconnect between all the government agencies that relate to the Clean Energy Agriculture Nexus. Innovators noted that solar water pumps can be supported by government bodies that work on energy, water, livestock, irrigation, and that policies and programs are often developed by one agency but need the input from others. So one of the asks is to form effective intragovernmental working groups and engage industry associations. Finally, innovators explain that they want a voice in policy making. Several noted that they collaborate with national renewable energy advocacy and trade organizations, but that renewable energy organizations and associations are not always representative of the clean energy agriculture nexus, since these companies are often small and less commercial than other members. So they noted that early stage companies are already stretched thin in resources and capital. And so they may not have the experience, resource, or time to engage with policy development. So the ask was to include credible trade associations and policy making that can represent a broader spectrum of interests and aggregate their needs. So one example of addressing this topic is GOGLA's Community of Champions, which is an open exchange between governments on energy access topics in Africa, and it holds frequent webinars and in-person trainings. Whoops. So in summary, we reach a few primary conclusions from this activity. First, innovators are developing a unique technologies and business models that have immense potential to transform the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. The clean energy agriculture nexus is nascent and straddles multiple sectors, food, water, energy, and often lacks clarity and definition in policy and regulatory frameworks. Both governments and donors have roles to play when it comes to enabling environments for clean energy agriculture, as noted by the recommendations we documented, but also by our speakers. And the full list of innovator priorities and their examples, solutions, and related insights are included in our guide. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Arai, for your presentation, a very interesting one. As I listened to you, two things that stood out to me was the fact that, again, some of the discussions we're having here have been on the table for a while. Given that agriculture, we have over 70% of our population is involved in agriculture, and that it contributes a significant amount to our GDP. I'm just wondering what the issue is with having government and the political support that we need to be able to move forward. My question to us as program initiators as well as participants is, what do we need to do to be able to adequately communicate to the political authorities and the public sectors in our countries so that they can fully come on board and support this sector? Because clearly from all the presentations that have been made, if we're able to do this effectively, it will go a long way to increase our GDPs in our country. So as we go forward, I'd like to hear comments and people's feedback on people's ideas on how we can convince the public sector, the political and public sectors to fully support the agri sector so that we are not doing it in a short-term manner, program after program, but we don't link them because the people who are supposed to lend the support don't seem to maybe we're not doing enough to communicate to them what they stand to gain from it. So I would like to see how this program, Water and Energy for Food, also helps us communicate that to the political and the public sectors. Thank you so much again, Arai. And the questions will keep coming. We will open up for questions after our second presentation. And our next presentation is by Taquin Mezaros. Did I mention it right? Is that the pronunciation of the name?
Yes, you did. Thanks a lot, Harriet.
Okay. So thank you, Taquin, and you're welcome. And we are waiting to hear from you on the approaches that you've used in the agriculture, in financing agriculture, and hope that we can learn and adapt some of the solutions to our sub-region to make some progress. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks a lot, Harriet. Good afternoon to all of you from beautiful Bonn in Germany. And I'd like to thank CRI and the colleagues from the W4F initiative for the opportunity to present to you Gsat's approach to promoting agricultural value chains. And I will also try to link this topic to the broader clean energy food nexus that you are all working on. But first, next slide, please. I'd like to provide some context and background. So the overarching development framework in which we as Gsat obviously operate is, of course, Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the assumption is that the goals of ending extreme poverty, chronic undernourishment and malnutrition can only be achieved in cooperation with actors along the agricultural value chains. So our Ministry for Development Cooperation, the BMZ, has set up a special initiative, which is called One World, No Hunger. And this initiative has actually invested 1.5 billion euros in the priority areas of food security and rural development and set up more than 200 projects in 35 partner countries. And this initiative also promotes value chains in the agricultural and food sector as an important priority area. Other strategic frameworks that are relevant for us are, of course, in the EU context, the Farm to Fork strategy, which is embedded within the broader European Green Deal initiative, which aims at making food systems fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly. So the assumptions behind Gsat's value chain approach are that, of course, improved competitiveness and an increase of the income of small farms in agriculture will contribute to more paid employment and strengthen the development of rural areas. Also that processed products, of course, achieve a higher price on the market compared to the price of the raw product, and that it is therefore in the interest of international and also specifically German development cooperation that a large share of the value added remains in the countries where the agricultural products are grown. Also, as we know, around 80% of the world's agricultural companies and businesses are run by small farmers, and therefore the integration of smallholder farmers into the value chains is essential. And then lastly, we have also seen in the current context of the corona pandemic, that the importance of economically stable and resilient agricultural value chains has to be emphasized, and that on a local, regional, and global level. Next slide, please. Another assumption is that small agricultural enterprises can only be successful and survive in the face of tough competition if they closely coordinate their activities with the companies that process and market their products. So that's why GIZ aims at promoting the cooperation of all relevant actors along the entire value chain. So German Development Corporation specifically supports smallholder farmers by supporting measures to increase their productivity, by supporting measures that allow smallholders to access agricultural financing, also by strengthening farmer organizations, and in general by developing skills and technical expertise needed in the agribusiness sector. Next slide, please. So GIZ's approach to promote value chains is based on a specific methodology, which we call value links. There's a comprehensive manual on how to promote value chains using this methodology, and this manual, I just want to mention this here, is in the public domain and can be accessed online. What I would like to specifically mention here is that GIZ promotes value chain development in such a way that the value chain does not only become economically more viable, but also socially more just and environmentally more sustainable. So GIZ's approach to value chain promotion reflects all three dimensions of the sustainability concept. And the manual actually has a specific chapter that addresses the ecological footprint of the value chain. So for GIZ, sustainable economic development means creating value along the value chain while using less water and energy. And therefore, in our value chain projects, GIZ also aims at promoting the use of water and energy saving technology and innovations. The value links methodology also includes a specific tool called energy mapping. And the question here, for example, is what is the type and level of energy use along the various segments of a given value chain? Next slide, please. Which is a slide that I actually would like to skip in the interest of time, so we can move to the next one. And yeah, this is just to mention to you that GIZ's approach to promote value chains is gender sensitive and takes into account the specific role that women play in the agricultural sector. And the approach tries to incorporate gender transformative approaches wherever this is meaningful and relevant. So our project, the one I'm involved with, developed a specific tool for that, which we call the gender guide for practitioners. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this slide is just to give you an idea of GIZ's portfolio in the context of value chain promotion. And I'd like to actually single out the first one. There is a so-called global GIZ project called Green Innovation Centers for the agriculture and food sector. And it's funded under the One World No Hunger initiative, which I had mentioned earlier. And this global project is currently being implemented in 14 African countries, including some ECOWAS member states in West African countries, namely Benin, Burkina Faso, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. And the aim of this global project is to incorporate agricultural innovations in the development and in the promotion of a given value chain. And these innovations can, of course, be climate friendly, energy efficient, and water efficient, so that the food production becomes more productive and environmentally more sustainable. Next slide, please, which is also going to be my final slide. Yeah, so this is an overview of the topics that are becoming increasingly more relevant in GIZ's approach to promote value chains, adaptation to climate change, water and irrigation, low emission and climate friendly agro-processing, and of course, digitalization. So as you can see, there are many linkages or interfaces also to the great work that the We4F initiative is carrying out. And yeah, we look forward to discussing these further with you. And I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Takin. That was a very interesting presentation. I think for me, listening to the two presentations, there are two things I heard: collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So looking at all the actors in the value chain and collaborating so that we can get the necessary methodologies and approaches, and also get some of the concerns of the various actors across so that we can move things forward. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation thus far. We're going to open up for questions at this stage. I already can see that a few of you have posted questions. So I am going to, please keep your questions coming, and I am going to quickly put this question out and have some of the members of the program team help us answer this question. There's a gentleman who's spoken about doing quite a bit of work drilling for irrigation in India, even during this period of COVID. And the fact that one of the problems they've encountered is that they are not able to get grants to be able to continue their work. So they would like to know how they can access grants so that they can do this work, continue to drill solar water pumping in agriculture in India so far, but how they access grants to extend their work. Jana, is there somebody who can give us an idea of what this is?
Hi everybody, this is Jana Schneider and I work for the We4Food program. The second session is going to be on access to financing, and we're going to have a short presentation on We4Food as well. So I would suggest to table this question for a second.
All right, thank you, Jana. So please hold on, participants, for the second session. It will be starting shortly. Okay. Now, I think there's a question here again about how international programs can facilitate the dialogue between the private sector and governments. This was what the first presentation was about, but this is a question that has been put forward by a participant. Who can help us from the team, please?
I can take a first stab at it. So one of the recommendations or one of the focus of our paper was this collaboration, right? And so in doing that and in evaluating the usefulness of working groups and exchanges, we got very interesting feedback in the sense that participants in a working group must see the value in that working group because it takes a lot of time to participate, to give opinions, to prepare, than to see nothing happening. And so I think you've mentioned a few times that these are topics that we've covered many times, that we continue to cover. So people want to see results out of those exchanges, and people want to see impact out of those exchanges. And so there's a few things that can be done to ensure that that happens. One is to ensure that the participants are decision makers and can have an impact and can take actions that then result into impact. And the other one is also to have the right participants, right? So to have decision makers across the spectrum of activities that impact the innovators and entrepreneurs in this space.
All right, that's an interesting one you posed, and it directly goes into the next question we have. The question they're asking is whether in your interviews you spoke with the policy makers, and what was your feedback from the policy makers?
So we did speak to policymakers, and in fact, in the roundtable, we had representatives of the Ministry of Energy, we had the Bureau Standard, we had the Revenue Authority. So we really try to capture participants and government representatives across the spectrum. We didn't get someone from the Agriculture Ministry, for example, which was something that was very much noted by both government and innovators. So it's not easy to get everyone around the table necessarily who has to be a part of this. But what was interesting is that at the end of the roundtable, people were very thankful for that opportunity to exchange. So I think it's important to create those spaces of both government and innovators to exchange about their difficulties and their priorities. You were asking what can we do, and it, you know, as we were doing the roundtable and we were writing the laundry list of things that can happen, there's just so many problems and so many issues. So the support to prioritize what really is going to have the most impact and what are the key interventions that can be most effective. I think governments very much appreciate data-driven information, and so that's another area that donors and programs can help with.
All right, again, thank you. My question is, I hear about governments appreciating it. How do we move them from appreciation and sometimes mediocre participation to actually action, because the situation in the sub-region calls for expedited action? So one of the questions I keep putting, you know, on the place of the experts is that, or the program team, is that how do we move the actors we are requiring to provide the necessary support to the point where they see the urgency in providing the support, and we're not having to spend most of the program time to drag them to the table.
I think that it's a very interesting point. Accountability is challenging. So from our experience, what we've seen is having champions that are really committed to doing something is often important. So I gave you the example of the Senegal VAT that was passed earlier this year. Under a different USAID program, we started working with the Ministry of Energy about 2 or 3 years ago and facilitated those exchanges between solar home system companies and powering agriculture equipment and service providers. And so that exchange took 3 years until that those exemptions were put in place. So noticing that it's going to take a long time, but really finding those champions that are willing to take it through is important.
Thank you so much, Arad. But before I move on to the next question, again, to the program team, my question is that, especially because of your answer, Arad, I'm asking whether we're involving the CSOs on the ground in these sectors. Because again, we need to draw government's attention that they need to come to the table and it's urgent. Then we need some advocacy on the ground to continue to talk about these so we get them to the table. Because if you look at the information of what's going to happen in the sub-region over the next few years, if our population and the quantity of food we're going to need to feed our people is going to double, then we can't have one discussion in 3 years. It's going to have to a little more than that. So I'm just asking what other avenues we should be exploiting to be able to bring all the stakeholders to the table so we can make much better progress than we've made to date.
Absolutely, and I think you've hinted at some of those answers, right? It's sustained commitment and being able to achieve that sustained commitment, and that's why I think like finding those champions that are willing to endure the difficulties and all of the roadblocks that are going to be found along the way, and that sustained support to addressing those and finding solutions as they appear is important.
Thank you so much, Ari. Thank you. Now, there's a question here for Takin. The question is, how can we find balance between environmental sustainability and the value chain?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Harriet. I think this is a good and important question because it refers to the old challenge that very often a purely market-oriented and market-driven approach to promoting value chains very often comes at the expense of environmental sustainability. So the question really is about how to reconcile these two principles and bring them into a balance that makes sense. So yeah, how can we balance this? I think this is also the topic of the conversation of this specific session we are having. I think from our point of view, on the one hand, of course, there's a need that business models, clean energy business models are developed which are economically viable and profitable. And that would be very much the role of the private sector and the innovators that we have been referring to today to come up with these kind of clean energy business models and solutions. But that would require, and that's the second point, of course, an enabling environment and policy, strategy and regulatory framework that actually incentivizes the development of such clean energy business models and solutions. And that is then the role of the government to put such a framework and enabling environment in place. So these two have to go hand in hand, and that's why in our mind it's also very important that there is a constant dialogue and exchange between private sector to express their needs and government to kind of articulate on the supply side what they can do to incentivize development of viable business models on the private sector side. Thanks.
Before I let you go, I quickly was going to ask you, in the programs you've done so far in producing the guides you've mentioned, have you had to establish a platform for collaboration in the countries you worked in, and are they still running?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not too familiar with the project that is actually being, with the work and the projects that are actually being implemented on the ground in the partner countries, because I work in a sector project based here in Bonn, and we are mainly an advisory project to BMZ as our ministry and commissioning party. The one global project that I mentioned, the Green Innovation Centers, they are currently active in a total of 14 African countries and very closely work with stakeholders on the ground and along the value chain. So their approach is basically to identify specific value chains and to promote them by incorporating kind of injecting specific innovations along the value chain, and they do have kind of in-country coordination mechanisms in place which involve government actors, private sector actors, and the actors along the specific value chain. So these kind of structures on the ground do exist.
It would be interesting to be able to find out what they are doing now and how maybe We for Food can support them, so that just in case they need support, so we don't have a situation where some programs establish the platform, we lose them and we start again, or we are not making the progress we would like to make on this program. But thank you very much, Takin. And I think it dovetails into the next question that was being asked about whether we can discuss a little bit some of the best practices that are currently being used on the African continent. I mean, I'm looking at the presentation, Ara, you made, and Takin, you've made as well. What have you found in your work that already exists that seems to be good practice that can be incorporated in what you're doing? Thank you.
Yeah, who should go first?
Takin, do you want to go?
Go ahead.
Ara is, okay, Ara is on, so Ara, you can go then, and then Takin next, please.
Yeah, so we found a few examples in the different areas that we've discussed, right? So I presented the example of the one window program import framework that has the harmonized system codes. Several countries are starting to experiment a lot with results-based financing. So one example is Kenya's results-based financing program, the COSAP. So there's a little bit of experience across the continent in these best practices. Takim?
Yeah, thanks. I do not have much to add, but from our experience in implementing GIZ projects, what seems to work well is if countries put private sector government dialogue platforms in place and institutionalize these, because that is a way for the government to get a better understanding of what the specific private sector needs are, and then, let's say, put a agricultural policy in place that is actually informed by private sector needs. So I think countries, and there are some where this seems to be working quite well, that institutionalize private sector government exchange platforms. That would be, for me, a best practice. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Takin. I think that was a very useful input. Ladies and gentlemen, we've over-traveled our time. We have one more question, but it seems to be on the finance angle. It's talking about import tax. Well, it's policy. Can I take this last one and then we end the session? It's from, it's on a little more information on income tax exemption on clean energy technology in the Gambia.
Sorry, I was away.
Kemo, was that a mistake? That was your question.
I step out. Some people are in my office. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
No, Kemo, you had asked a question about wanting a little more information about import tax exemption.
I asked the question, Harriet Sire.
Oh,
and,
okay.
It's about the situation of import taxes and so on for clean tech energy. What is the situation in the Gambia? So we can see if it is something that we can build on from there.
Okay.
Yeah, Sire, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Actually, in the Gambia here, when we realized that we are producing almost 100% of our power from thermal generation, the government decided to look inward to promote renewable energy. And one of the ways to promote renewable energy is to provide those incentives, like free import duty and things like that. So the way we went about it, we prepare a cabinet paper and presented that to cabinet. Initially, that's what we did. We prepare a cabinet paper, present to cabinet. The cabinet took a decision to waive import duty on all renewable energy devices imported into the country. But we didn't stop there. After some time, we tried to put this into law. So when we develop our renewable energy law, we have a section dealing with the whole incentive on renewable energy devices. And one of them is the import duty is zero. Sales tax also is zero. But apart from that, we also provide incentive for renewable energy projects. Like they'll be exempted from paying, taxes for a number of years. So these are some of the incentives we have as far as financial support to these renewable energy projects are concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sise. Siri, you're okay with the answer, right? You got some information on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we're closing this first session. We'll take a short break and be back with the second session. But before we close, I think one of the key messages I was hearing, given that the we have agreed on the fact that agriculture in our sub-region needs some help, and that clean energy has a big contribution to make, is the issue of institutionalization of the collaboration between public and the private sector, so that we can continue to have these conversations and find solutions to the issues that plague the sector, so we can move forward with it. So with that, we will be moving into the session 2, and I will we'll give you a 5 minutes break for everybody to stretch their legs a little bit, and we should be back in 5 minutes sharp. Thank you so much for your cooperation in running this session.
Welcome back, everyone, to session 2 of this important discussion. Our topic for this session is access to financing in the energy food nexus for supply and demand of innovation. This topic today and these engagements today are extremely timely, as you heard in the previous session. Today, we know that the lack of affordable processing storage facilities, as well as energy to energize both water and food, remains a challenge in the continent. And access to finance has remained one of the key issues and challenges that developers continue to harp about in terms of being able to accelerate and scale up their development and their work in the sector. So I'm really excited to hear more today from the panelists today and to learn more about how we progress. Before we go ahead, a quick introduction. My name is Ujunwa Ojemeni. I'm an impact investing and energy and development expert who is focused on driving the Sustainable Development Goal 7 in Africa. And I'm also a big advocate for gender inclusivity and equal representation in the energy sector. Today, I advise the Honorable Commissioner for Energy and Mineral Resources in Lagos State, and I also advise entrepreneurs at the Private Finance Advisory Network hosted by UNIDO. Amongst other things, I'm really passionate about clean energy, and I'm on the advisory board of the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, and equally passionate about women in the energy sector. And so I'm the founder of the African Women in Energy Development Initiative. So really excited for these discussions, and I will just invite my panelists and speakers today. Harriet is on first, who we just heard from. She'll be giving us the keynote today on de-risking financing in the energy food nexus and the role of capacity building and data. So today, really, at the end of the day, a few questions I want us to have answered is really, what are those challenges that are facing access to finance, both private and public finance, into the water, energy, foods nexus or sector, and what kind of support do we need to ensure that companies have to be able to obtain this capital? So I'm really excited to start with this keynote. Just a little bit about Harriet. She already did a quick introduction before, but for those that are just joining us, Harriet is the co-founder and executive partner at Arthur Energy, which is a leading energy consulting firm in Accra. She holds a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronic engineering from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana, as well as an MBA from the University of Ghana. And with over 35 years of working across various sectors, especially in the energy sector, she has held roles at the Volta River Authority, Ghana Grid Company, Kumasi Institute of Technology, Energy and Environment, before becoming an executive partner at Arthur Energy Advisors. So I'm really excited to have her here to share her insights on this very important topic on de-risking financing in the energy food nexus, the role of capacity building and data. Welcome once again. I'm glad to have you back.
Thank you so much, Ujua, for this introduction. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me, please?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, all right. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon we're talking about de-risking financing for our agricultural sector, our energy, agriculture, food sector, and we're asking what the role of capacity building and data can play in this effort. I think that the issue of de-risking financing is one that is familiar for businesses in all areas of our operations. Every business looks at financing and looks at the risks involved, and agriculture is no different. It just so happens that for us in the sub-region, agriculture happens to involve about 70% of our population. And even though this seems to have come late, given the numbers involved and its contribution to our economies, it's still right that at least we get to talk about it now. Now, if we look at the information on the agricultural sector in our sub-region, we realize that a lot of it happens amongst smallholder farmers and in the rural areas. Now, these are areas where we have the least energy access, and where they have it, the quality is poor. The nature of financing also that happens in these areas is not what we tend to be used to. It's not what is happening in the big cities. And we tend to kind of use the same models we've used in the big cities in more commercial environments to apply to these rural areas and in agricultural sector. I think that for the financing, especially the financing institutions and the players to be able to work well with the agricultural sector, given that most of it is in the rural areas, we will have to take a better look at the target audience and who we're dealing with, and really understand their environment, the way they think, the way they do their things, so that in our coming to the table with them, we can communicate along the same lines. I think that if you look at the way we look at risk in the agricultural sector, in our environment in the sub-region, one cannot help but to think that we kind of come from a place of thinking the target group, which is the smallholder farmer, the citizens in the rural areas, they actually come to the table with absolutely nothing. I think that may be erroneous for the most part, in the sense that if we do go and do a real evaluation of their situation, we will find that they have wealth in other forms, and if we were prepared to go in openly and see what we can develop for them, we may be able to come up with financing schemes that work better for de-risking the environment, so that we can lend to them. And that's one thing that I'll talk about. How much information do we have of the target group, and what have we done with the information? Is the situation that we're looking at already existing formal arrangements and wanting to apply it directly to them without contextualizing the situation, or we're looking at them as the target group and trying to understand them? And when I talk about that, one of the things that comes to my mind is the telecom sector, the mobile telephony sector in our sub-region. I think when the cell phones first were being brought into our sub-region, there some assumptions were made that the region could not, may not be able to afford it, may not be able to access it, and so forth. I think if we look at the access today in the sub-region of cell phones, rural areas, urban areas, we can say that some of the assumptions we made in the initial entry into the markets were largely wrong. I would suggest that in looking at de-risking for this sector of our economies, and also the target groups being rural and agriculture and our smallholder farmers in our sub-region, that we come to learn the environment so that we can better define things for them. I agree completely that capacity building and data has a big role to play in this, because to be able to understand them, we need to have the data on them to analyze, to understand. I think capacity building is also very important, because the two parties being the rural, the smallholder farmer in agriculture, needs to understand where the providers of finance are coming from and what they are seeking to do, so that together some effective models that really work can be put on the table for the parties to consider and adopt. I think this topic is one that has been discussed several times again at different fora, and I get the impression that program after program, maybe the learnings we have is not institutionalized, so the data is in bits and pieces all over the place. The question again becomes how, in the capacity building and in the data collection, we institutionalize what we're doing so that we can build on the activities of various programs, so we can quickly make progress. I think a lot of sectors, the experience and the examples from a lot of sectors show that if we engage and we adapt, we develop things that work well with the target group and their ways of life, we will find them a market, and a group of people who are ready to engage and make and contribute much more than they are now to the economies of the country, and indeed become a market for the world as well. So I'm looking forward to some of the ideas we'll share in this session on how we de-risk financing for these segments of our economies. Thank you very much, Yua, and I wish this session very well.
Thank you so much, Harriet. You raised some very interesting points that I'm hoping that as we go through the session, we can address, or we can even think about it further, really about the kinds of financing models that we consider for this demographic, the rural communities, the rural areas, and agriculture specifically is unique in its makeup. And so we must start thinking differently about what models work for this subsector. The second thing you said that's very important relating to data is really how much data do we have today on this group and on this target group of users. What do we know about them? Are we collecting enough data, and are we even using it? More importantly, I also think, how are we making it available to developers as they develop projects or innovative solutions? So I think it's very important that going forward, as we craft programs, data collection and making that data available should be a very important part, especially making it freely available for developers to use so that we can solve all of these challenges we've noted. So I'm really excited about the discussions going forward and how we might address some of these points that Harriet has rightly raised for the rest of this session today. Our first presentation today is from Jeff Engel. He's PAEGC Finance and Business Advisor, and he's going to be presenting on access to financing for early stage innovators, ESIs, in the clean energy agriculture nexus. Jeff has over 10 years of experience supporting innovators and initiatives that bring to market science-based solutions to address global challenges, just like the ones we're talking about today. His clients and partners include foreign governments, NGOs, donor organizations such as the USAID, GIZ, CIDA, universities, as well as private sector companies. We're really excited to have you here, Jeff, today, and really looking forward to some insights from your presentation and hoping to address some of the questions that have been raised.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm quite humbled to be able to follow Miss Harriet in this. Having known some of the great work that she's done on the continent, it's very humbling to be on the same panel as her, so I appreciate the opportunity. Let's see, I think, is everybody able to see my screen okay? The presentation coming up?
Yes, perfect.
Let me put it into presentation mode. There we go. I think that will work. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. As was stated, I come from a private sector background. Most of my work has involved fundraising, so raising capital through the private sector for innovators looking to take to market technology and solutions. I come from an investment banking background and very much the for-profit world. I got introduced to powering agriculture and supported a portfolio of innovators on that program in the last two and a half years of that program's life cycle. In doing that, a lot of the services and technical assistance that we provided to innovators during that time was focused around business model adaptation, go-to-market strategies, fundraising strategies, and becoming investment ready if that was in fact the appropriate pathway for the innovator to pursue. Is one of the knowledge products that got created out of this program was something that I was the lead author on, which is what I'm going to present to you today, which was looking at access to financing for early stage innovators and trying to understand really what were the barriers that they experience in trying to pursue this financing. So at the end of 2019, early 2020, we published this Powering Agriculture paper, Access to Financing, specifically focused on the clean energy agriculture nexus. So we looked at early stage innovators and then those whom were working in this sector that we're talking about today. We had a myriad of innovators in the program. We had everything from research-based institutions all the way to to scaled up enterprises that are for-profit working to solve problems in primarily in developing economies. So the paper that we created asked 2 questions basically, which is what the introduction here was, that what is preventing these innovators from accessing private capital and follow-up funding. So to start with, one of the questions that we first got was about grant funding. That is not what this paper is about. I'll address grant funding in the Q&A, but we were looking at accessing private capital and additional funding after an innovator received a grant. So I think it's important to just make that distinction right off the bat, since we had that question come up almost as soon as this webinar began. The second question that we asked was how can we support these innovators? What kind of support would help them to be able to access this financing? In doing that, we did a traditional literature review to understand reports and papers and data that was coming out in aggregate from the macro market to understand what the funding landscape looked like. On top of that, we then conducted interviews with investors, innovators, people connected to the programs to understand firsthand what they felt their challenges were. In doing those interviews, opportunities became very apparent as how we can support these innovators to actually go about getting financing and removing some of these barriers. So that was the process. So most of what we're presenting in the paper is not, well, none of it is opinion by the authors. It is all based on interviews that with investors and innovators primarily, and then it is supported with market research that came out of the market at the time. Yeah, let's see here. I think there we go. Yeah. So some findings from the research that we did. The availability of funding is not an issue. So to say it another way, there's a tremendous amount of capital that's available at the moment, and perhaps not perhaps, but there's more available capital and funding out there in the market than has ever existed at any point in time in history. So availability is not the issue. There is money out there. The other finding that we found is that innovators that were well positioned, that had investment ready enterprises, that had proven some sort of market traction, that had some sort of working technology, the product in hand, they had a high rate of success in finding funding. It was not a problem for us to help those innovators to get funded. But again, that was dependent upon what stage of development they were and how investment ready they were. And we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. And then the main finding is that yes, despite the availability, that there is so much capital available, there's also never been more competition, and we're seeing it globally. So it used to be a very much kind of Western focused innovations coming to market out of Western, European, American, developed world research labs, and that's where innovation was happening. That's absolutely not the case today. You see a tremendous amount of innovation from all corners of the world. Those innovators are also trying to secure additional capital. So the takeaway, I think, is that there's a lot of money out there, but there's an incredible amount of competition for these funds. Yeah, so our interviews led to some insights that we'll present here. Many of the early stage innovators had limited expertise in how to access capital. The innovators themselves many of them were kind of engineers or academicians or people that had been involved in sciences. Those are not necessarily the same skill sets that can be easily adapted to the fundraising process. That's a different skill set, different language altogether, different process. Most of our innovators were unaware of that, did not have that expertise. The second insight, they had a lack of knowledge about financial markets. They would conflate terms like debt and equity. They weren't sure what the different terminology meant. They're not sure where to find that capital. Where do you go for money? Oh, you go to a bank. No, that's actually a very inappropriate place for an early stage innovator to go. Examples like that. The third insight, they're again, kind of related to the other one, they're unaware of the funding that's available. Their world is focused on, the technology and building the company. They're not aware of the funding that's around them or may actually be available. And then the first thing was, the fourth insight that came up was that a lot of the innovators in these programs received inconsistent support. If they were working with, for example, someone like myself or my partner on Powering Ag who have deep experience in preparing companies to be investment ready, they received one level of technical assistance from us based on our experience. Others in some other programs didn't receive that same kind of support just because the people who were supporting them had different skill sets. So there were some inconsistencies in that. So the 4 barriers that we found in this paper, investor fatigue, the second one, investment and credit readiness, the third one, deficiencies in investor discovery, and the fourth one, profit motivation. I'm going to talk about each of these with opportunities to support overcoming these barriers. So the first one, investor fatigue. This was from the investors, again, through the interviews. A lot of the investors started to feel disenfranchised with the clean energy and ag space because they have not been able to create exit opportunities and actually realize financial gain from some of their early investments. So as an investor, you're always playing a time game. It's not always about the money that you've put in, but it's about the time that it's going to take you to get that money back. The longer that time window goes, if you're able to generate a return faster, that's typically better for the investor. That's what they want. They want their money to go in and come out with a positive return because then you can redeploy it. The longer that it takes to exit an investment, the longer your capital's tied up, and that's not something that investors like. They need to be able to go in and out and turn their portfolio through the life cycle of those funds. That hasn't happened in the same way that it was forecasted to have happened in these sectors, which led to the second barrier, which is a lot of these investors are now not looking for more deals in this sector because they've already got investments made. They may be competing investments, which investors tend to not do. The third one. New investors felt that the market was saturated and that they were unwilling to compete with existing investors in the market already. The opportunities here, I think it can be summed up pretty quickly. Just to introduce new investors, bring new money to the table. One example is a Japanese group that I work with. I help to identify new investment opportunities for them. They are looking to invest in the East African market, a very untraditional investor in that they don't necessarily fit the profile of investors in that region, but yet they're hungry for opportunities in that geography. That would be an example of a new investor that could be brought to the region, whatever region that may be. And then, I think it's important, again, and this will be a continuing theme, is to work with consultants and liaisons who can provide these types of relationships and help to bring both sides together. That will be helpful in overcoming this idea of investor fatigue. The second barrier, let's see, investment and credit readiness. This has to do with the preparation that a company goes through before they're actually able to access additional funding. First-time innovators, again, they don't know how to position their company for fundraising. They have this idea that their company is further developed than it is. Maybe they've done a few pilots or proven their technology. That doesn't necessarily make a company. A company is something different. It's further developed. It's got, human resources, it's got processes, it's got organizational documents, all of those types of things that enable it to actually be commercially viable and therefore investment ready. A lot of the innovators had never heard of something called a deal room or didn't have their documents together, their organizational documents in one place. If an investor is going to invest in a company, they need to be able to have access to these things, and you as the innovator need to be able to provide them. So the opportunities is to provide training, technical assistance, help these innovators understand what they should be doing along their development pathway to achieve milestones and to become interesting to an investor. And that, again, that's support that can come out of technical assistance or again, consultancy with someone who has done this type of work and prepared companies in the past. The third one, deficiencies in investor discovery. So investor discovery is a process in which you as the innovator go out and actually try to find where is this money. So that's a person-to-person type of activity. You need to have a process for doing that. You need to track that information in some sort of, usually a software. It could be as simple as a spreadsheet. It could be as advanced as something like Salesforce, or even tracking things on LinkedIn is a possibility. But not knowing where to look was a problem that these innovators faced. And again, it was kind of twofold. They didn't know where to find these investors, and then when they did find them, they didn't know the conversations to have. They were kind of unaware of how to approach these people and how to talk to them. So again, coaching and technical assistance is a good way to help overcome those barriers, because that is just a relationship game at that point. The third barrier, if I can get my slide, profit motivation. So this was one that I think we run into a lot with donor-funded programs and social impact programs in general, is that they're not always designed for innovators to end up making a profit. They may be tied to social impact or the betterment of society. Those are great goals. That's a great outcome for to achieve with grant funding. That, however, is not an investable opportunity. An investment opportunity is one in which there is some sort of profit generated that can eventually lead an investor to recuperate their money with additional capital on top of it to generate a return. So it's important to make that distinction very early. If you're the organization, are we a nonprofit that's going to try to affect social change and impact the world positively, or are we a for-profit enterprise? You can still have the same goal of making positive social impact. That's fine. But there's a distinction between a nonprofit and a for-profit enterprise. And having that conversation with innovators very early, I think, is useful to just get that definition cleared up, because then that leads to what kind of funding you can pursue. So the opportunities, again, for technical assistance, I think that's the takeaway from this presentation, is that these programs, they provide technical assistance to the innovators, and that's very positive. And that's fundamental in shaping their ability to access this financing. I went through in the slide some specific opportunities for doing that, but here are three kind of takeaway points. Some innovators found themselves asking too early. So they thought, okay, we did a pilot, we're ready, our technology's ready, let's go out there and try to raise capital. They need to have somebody come in that says, that serves as a reality check for them to assess how ready they actually are. Innovators will always think they're more developed than they are. If you're providing technical assistance, you can be the reality check to help them understand exactly where they are. Asking too little. A lot of innovators thought, okay, if we just get this next little bit of capital, we can do this next milestone, and then we'll get more money after that. Investors are increasingly looking to make larger investments. It takes the same amount of time to do the due diligence on a company if you're an investor for a small amount of money as opposed to a larger amount of money. The process is still the same. Investors want to get more money out the door and into these companies faster. When we're seeing that as a trend, that the smaller rounds of capital are not that attractive to investors as they used to be. And then the third one is asking the wrong sources. This was the example that I gave of, well, where do you get money? If you asked an innovator, a lot of them think, oh, well, you go to a bank, banks have money. That's actually not where you go at all in the early stages. So wasting time on pursuing the wrong types of financing is something that we who provide technical assistance to these innovators can help to alleviate. And I think that is it. Yes, so I will stop sharing that. And
thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I may have went a few minutes over. I was having some trouble with my,
that's
with my
fine.
internet connection.
Your presentation was really interesting and very important, because this topic around funding for energy, agriculture, water is at the top of everyone's mind. And you're saying that the funding is available, but investment readiness, especially for the different businesses at their different stages, is crucial. And technical assistance clearly is doing a great job in helping these companies to be prepared to take on this funding, but they need to have that reality check that lets them know if they're asking too early, too little, or asking the wrong source. You have a number of questions that have come in, but we'll take these at the end. It's been a very interesting presentation, and we'll move on to the next presentation now.
Thank you.
So next we'll have Melanie Shrubok, I hope I pronounced that properly, who is the Program Manager Agri-Finance for Burkina Faso and Togo at GIZ. Her presentation is going to be focused on a customer-oriented approach for better access to innovations such as clean energy solutions. And just a few words about Melanie. She holds a master's degree in economics and 2 subject bachelors in economics and French. She's worked across interdisciplinary research projects, including Urban Food Plus, focusing on urban and peri-urban agriculture in West African cities. And she conducted a survey in Burkina Faso. And she's also had further experience, rural development and agriculture experience, as well as food security experience during her internship at GIZ. I'm really excited to have you here. You've clearly been on the ground and worked across this particular target market, just as Harriet mentioned, that we need to pay close attention to. So I'm really excited, and I'm sure the companies on here want to learn more about how to approach and how to have a customer-oriented approach as we consider innovations.
I think Ujunwa is experiencing connectivity issues right now. Melanie, if you just want to start your presentation, thank you very much. You are muted, Melanie.
Yes, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Let's try again.
Okay, we can hear you now, so just your presentation.
Yes. Okay, I hope you can see my presentation now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, thank you very much. My name is Melanie Krobock, and today my colleague Didier Jomassi, who's the component leader of Mali, he's not available today, so I said I can take over his presentation for today. As I'm the project manager for Togo and Burkina Faso, I would, and I'm not well acquainted with the Malian context, I would highly encourage you to get into contact with Mr. Jomassi if you have specific technical questions. Okay. So today I will present you the demand-oriented approach for better access to clean energy innovations from our side. So I will briefly present you our global project, the promotion of agricultural finance for agri-based companies in rural areas, also known as AgFin. I will present you one example of innovation that have already been introduced in Mali. I will talk about challenges that related to the introduction of new clean technologies and how we as a project can contribute to facilitate the access of our target groups to finance for these innovations. Somehow Sorry, do you still see the content? Because somehow my presentation is...
Yes, the content page is what we have on still.
Okay. Sorry, maybe I still have to really hope that it works. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So ACFIN is implementing its approach in 8 sub-Saharan countries. 5 of them are located in West Africa. And next year, Côte d'Ivoire is also joining us. So the selection of our countries is closely related to the presence of the GIZ Global Project Green Innovation Centers, as ACFIN is catering for the financing needs of the Green Innovation Centers target groups. So, what do we do? The project aims at improving the supply of farms and agri-based enterprises in rural areas with financial services tailored to their business models. So the project intervenes on both the demand and the supply side. So we are combining capacity development for smallholder farmers, farmer organizations, and agri-based MSMEs. And we combine it with the development of capacities in the financial sector. Therefore, we can say that ACFIN serves as a bridge linking the agricultural and the financial sector. We are working in 3 fields of actions. So on the one hand side, we are supporting the demand side. We are supporting, like on the demand side, these are the farmers. On the supply side, our partner financial institutions. And the third field of action is the development of concepts and trainings that can be applied on both the supply and the demand side. Our approach can be presented in the shape of an arrow. So basically the starting points are financing needs that have been identified by the Green Innovation Centers and other GIZ projects. And we are starting in identifying profitable and sustainable business models. That serves as a basis for the development of adapted financial products for our partner financial institutions. And at the same time, it is also necessary for the farmers to have a profitable business model to get access to finance. So on the supply side, above, like on top, you can see that we are first selecting partner financial institutions, and then we are strengthening their capacities and expertise in the field of agricultural value chain finance. And it is very crucial for FI staff to increase the knowledge about agriculture and the specific value chain. Further, we are supporting the FIs in developing new products, piloting them, and finally make them available for the agricultural stakeholders. On the demand side, what we are doing here, we are adapting our trainings to the target group's needs. We are training them in financial literacy. We are supporting them in, for example, negotiating credit terms with FIs, and we are preparing them for the loan application. When both sides are well trained and are advised, we are bringing them together so that farmers can have access to the adapted financial products. Well, so in the context of this webinar, our role is to facilitate and to scale up the access to finance for innovations developed by GIZ projects. So one of the most advanced innovations is the solar powered pump, which you can see here in this picture. It is used in the potato and vegetable value chain, and we already have a business model in Mali for the production of vegetables using the conventional petrol-powered pump, and now we only have to exchange the conventional one by the solar powered pump and then update our calculations. This will be also the example in the following. Another example is, which is still in planning, but it hasn't been introduced yet, is the hybrid dryer. And according to our colleagues from the Green Innovation Centers and the information that we received, this is usually used in the mango processing, and this dryer uses gas and solar power. So you can here also see the estimated costs, which is very important to know in order to do proper calculations for this type of innovation. So of course, every introduction of new technologies is facing challenges. Well, first of all, it is a challenge to facilitate the access of farmers and actors in the agricultural value chains to the renewable energy technologies, and at the same time also to improve the access to finance for those investments. But it's also very important to develop strategies to make clean energy technologies very profitable, and that is crucial in order to convince potential customers to invest in those innovations. So here in red, you can see where AgFin can actually support to overcome these obstacles. So what are we doing precisely to improve access to finance in order to promote investments in renewable energies or technologies? So the starting point is what we call our business model analysis, and it's divided into 6 steps, as you can see in this picture. We are starting with an appraisal, the selection of suitable business models, detailed calculations to prove profitability, followed by mini business cases and a validation workshop. So this analysis already involves partner financial institutions and the demand side, so that we can gather as much information as possible to develop profitable business models. So for example, in step 2, our partner financial institutions can already indicate which business model it might be eligible for financing according to their policies. So as our business model analysis approach or instrument is a very comprehensive tool, I cannot go too much into detail here, but please do not hesitate, just get in contact with us if you want to have more information on that. So in the scope of the business model analysis, the final product are fact sheets, and on the left, and we are providing these fact sheets to the financial institutions so that they really understand the needs of the customers or the consumers. So on the left-hand side, you can see the business model for vegetable production, very simple, using the conventional petrol-powered pump. And on the right-hand side, you can see the same product, but using the solar-powered motor pump. All these information are important for the FI's agents to fully understand what farmers and agribusinesses need. So our business model analysis is also well integrated into the development of financial products. So step 1 to 3 correspond to the market research. You develop a prototype, you test it, you roll it out. And at the level of production or the product rollout, it is very important to integrate the newly developed product into the loan portfolio so that it is accessible to all stakeholders in the agricultural value chain. And then you also need to train the staff. So they really need to know how to analyze and evaluate the farmer's loan requests and so on. So what does it mean for us? So once we have analyzed and calculated the business model using the solar pump, we can replace the conventional one and just make it and make the new innovation available to the demand side. So even though the acquisition of the solar pump is like much more expensive than the conventional one, this business model is still profitable as the farmer saves expenditures of petrol in the long run. So here I will show you our approach again, like on this specific example. So we are starting with the Green Innovation Centers indicating, hey, we need financing for the solar pump. So then we are just identifying the business model. At the same time, we are training the FIs regarding the vegetable value chain. We help them to develop the project that matches the demand of the needs of the demand side. And at the same time, we also train the demand side on this specific business model and how to benefit of it or how they could benefit. So for example, you see here also the egg-bait training. So this is one of our training concepts for advanced farmers and agri businesses, and it basically teaches extensive knowledge in the analysis of the entire business or enterprise. It takes a closer look on possibilities and implications of investments for businesses, and we are also supporting to develop an investment plan for the particular entrepreneur. And finally, we are again trying to bring demand and supply side together. So to summarize, I mean, we can say that if farmers and agribusinesses perceive innovations as useful, there is a very high chance that renewable energy technologies are actually adopted. So it's crucial for developers of innovative technologies to know exactly what does the demand side need, and just to design the innovation appropriately. So I really hope that I was able to give you a rough idea of what we are doing and how we are promoting the access of renewable energies or energy technologies in Mali.
Thank you very much, Melanie. That was a very detailed presentation, and I think it just helped to, it fits into the entire discussion. So we started with Jeff trying to understand what the challenges and opportunities for access to financing, especially for energy, is, and then you went into the portion especially focused on agriculture and how innovation is important to move the entire subsector forward, and how we need to understand the demand and supply aspects of it to be able to craft innovative solutions for this subsector. So I think this is a very important contribution to the discussions, and it will help us as we frame the rest of the discussions and we move into the next segment, which then wraps everything up, going deep into the entire water, energy, food, and Nexus. So we're going to have Lucas Ferrini, who is the Hub Manager West Africa for WE4F, who is going to talk to us about what support from WE4F is required to promote scaling of innovation in the clean energy food nexus. So this just brings everything together. A bit about Luca. Luca is based in Abidjan, and he's the team leader for the Water and Energy for Food program at GIZ. His team basically funds and supports innovative solutions for food production, from green energy to efficient water technology. Luca previously worked in Niger on water management and in Brussels for a European multi-donor program on energy access in Africa. And before then, he had led some rural projects in other parts of Africa. So this experience, water, food, bringing everything together, and energy, I'm really excited about what the program is doing and how the sector as well as the continent can then take advantage of this important program to promote the sector. So Luca, over to you. Tell us more about the program and what kind of support you're providing.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So all the lessons learned and the topics that were discussed until now and that stem from powering agriculture, the grand challenge that was funded in the last 3 years, have come together in the creation of the Water and Energy for Food Global Initiative. Next slide, please. The initiative is an international effort by 4 donors that you see on your screen, to be joined very soon by the European Union, which aims to support innovation in the agribusiness space throughout Africa, East Asia, and the MENA region. In this case, I will present to you the efforts that are ongoing in West Africa, and that stem from the lessons learned we just discussed. So the investment portfolio is of $65 million over the countries you see in the next slide that just came up. So in West Africa, the 9 countries on your screen are the focus. And the idea is really to bring financing, technical assistance, and human capacity development to the agribusiness sector in a holistic way to really address all the challenges that were discussed by the previous eminent speakers. Thanks. Next slide. So some of the solutions are indeed energy-based solutions, supporting farmers to switch from traditional means of energy and water sources to green and more efficient means of energy sources and water usage. So anything, in the next slide, you see all the value chain across the agribusiness scope, from production of food products in the field, so efficient irrigation, water storage, and all technologies or approaches that can be considered green and innovative. We are here to fund them through different instruments and also to provide the technical assistance and financial opportunities for these innovations to be spread throughout the West African region. Moving on to transformation and anything related to solar pumping or solar milling or biogas efforts in the transformation of food products and giving them the value added they need to then go to the market and provide that return on investment that the producers need to make the most of the investment on their own technology. So the producer or the food producer will invest in a technology if it brings added value and value addition to its product in order to get a better price on the market and therefore come back and make worth the initial investment. At the same time, we work on conservation. So anything to do with energy audits and energy efficiency or water efficiency in cooling and freezing, for example, and also on distribution, transport, and further cooling and freezing at the distribution venues of food. Next slide. Here are the countries in focus. For the audience, we really have an overlap with the ECOWAS region and the ECRI colleagues who are hosting this event with us. And the kind of topics we focus on are not value chain specific. So we do have an open portfolio moving from rice to fruit, to vegetables, to gardening, and anything that can come under that. Of course, we do see a potential for certain sectors such as rice, palm oil, and cocoa, and the like, particularly with our perspective from Côte d'Ivoire and the neighboring regions. But in terms of technology, we span the whole spectrum, so we are open to technological solutions coming from solar, coming from biogas, coming from IT solutions, so apps for weather forecasting or for use of water and irrigation. These innovations can apply for funding in our program. Next slide. So how do we support the innovations or the companies trying to purchase or to make use of the innovations? So for those who consider themselves innovators, so they do provide a technological green solution, they apply to our calls for funding. And those are the direct grants we provide in the scope of between 50,000 and up to 300,000 euro per innovator. When it comes to other kind of actors in the agribusiness space, for example, transformers or supermarkets or those looking or even farmers looking to acquire the innovative technology in question, which can be, again, the solar pump or the solar mill or the water harvesting technology or the biogas technology, we can enter into a public-private partnership, meaning that we fund half of the investment with grant money. So we come in with free money, which does not have to be returned to us, but which has to be justified for the acquisition or the use or the spread of a green technology in the agribusiness space. And all of this financial support comes with technical assistance and knowledge sharing and capacity building. Next slide. So when it comes to the lessons learned of the previous programs, it's really an effort focusing on increasing food production. Increasing food production whilst making sure that we remain within the boundaries of what nature provides us with. So water and energy sources by definition are limited, apart for renewable energy, which is why we feel that water efficient technologies and renewable energy technologies are technologies to be spread to ensure sustainable food production. And last two slides. In terms of what we have learned from the studies that were presented in the first session, so policy is something we see as key. So we look to bring lessons learned from the ground, from innovators, from the private sector up to a level in which policy can be made to facilitate entry of technology, to facilitate innovation and green solutions in the markets we deal with. So what the big lesson on policy, and the next lesson on the next slide is about financing, which was addressed extensively by Jess and Melania. Next slide, Jana, please. That slide, that aspect of financing is dealt with through the whole array of instruments that Jeff mentioned, coming from training of those applying for funds through to events in which the financiers and the technology providers come together and share a common language, to the development of or adaptation of existing financial instruments to very specific local contexts. So all these activities are part of our integrated approach, and we really look forward to extending the implementation to some of the listeners today and those who will approach us in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Luca. I think this was a perfect way to wrap up the session. I mean, bringing in the fact that there is some funding available, there is technical assistance available for the innovative solutions that have been described above. It's really exciting to know that we will continue to facilitate those matchmaking sessions. Just like Jeff described, some of the developers don't know where to find investors, and even in terms of policy makers, those roundtables that were discussed in the first session are very important to continue the discussions to ensure that the right policies are in place to drive the investments into this innovative subsector that we need. So it's really exciting to see the work you're doing. You've provided a website where we can get more information for all of the innovators in the room. So really exciting to hear about that. We've run out of time, but I'll just manage to take 2 questions because most of our questions have been addressed. Jeff has addressed most of them, but I believe there's one more for you, Jeff. But I'll go to Melanie first. There's a question around, do farmers struggle with having to pay back the loans for a long time? Melanie, the farmers you've worked with, is your experience that they struggle to pay back the loans?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, I think in the case of Mali, I cannot really, I cannot give you any qualified answer on this, as I'm not well acquainted with Mali, and also Togo and Burkina Faso are very like new country packages in our project. However, yes, I guess maybe related to COVID, there might be some short-term, maybe even long-term effects. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jeff, there's one last question you weren't able to address, and I think it's really, how can small companies become investment ready, and are there resources that helped? Maybe the areas around resources would be useful if you can address that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll keep my answer brief. I intentionally didn't answer that in the chat window because I wanted to address it in person, I guess. But yeah, there are resources. One of the links I'm going to provide in the chat window is a link to a presentation we did about a month and a half ago that was a longer version of the 15 minutes that I gave today. So it was closer to an hour. It's on the We for Food blog site. I'll link to that. In there's a couple resources, specific resources that innovators can use and tools that they can use. The other piece of advice that I would give any company or any innovator is find someone in your network who can be a mentor to you in this process. They don't need to be a consultant. A consultant tends to indicate that there's some sort of monetary payment or some sort of fee for service, which a company may not, that may not be of value to a company at a very early stage. But find somebody who's been a part of a fundraising process that can help to advise just casually on how to start preparing yourself for that investment readiness. I do that for a lot of companies. I'm always available to be approached in that sort of capacity. I like hearing what innovators are doing. I'm not alone. I think all of us that work in this development space, we're always interested in learning about new innovations, meeting new people, understanding their development trajectory. Just start approaching people if you're one of these founders and innovators. And people will happily talk to you, and they'll talk to you more and easier if you're not asking them for money. If you're asking them for advice, they'll give you advice. If you ask them for money, well, that becomes a different conversation. But most of us are happy to help with those types of conversations. So I would say find a mentor.
Thank you so much. So this has been a very interesting session right from the beginning. Letting us know that the financing models for this specific sector, rural agriculture, water, is not the typical urban setting we expect or commercial. and we must be mindful. We need to ensure that the companies are ready, are investment ready. And finally, innovation is key, and the technical assistance, support, and funding is available, and these resources have been provided. So the links to all the resources have been shared. The final words from ECRI before we close here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Ujunwa, Harriet, to all the presenters. This was a very informative session. On behalf of the Executive Director of ECRI, I would like to congratulate all of you for this exciting 2 days. I think we have learned a lot. We also have had confirmation to a lot of the different assumptions that we've been having over the years. We are in line with increasing food production. We must also guard against food wastage. So in that aspect, I think through the water and energy for food production, our work should look at safeguarding the post-production harvest, the harvest of some great value chains that see a lot of wastage. We must also put great emphasis on information generation and dissemination. Over the past 2 days, I've heard a lot about different interesting guides or manuals that have been developed, and it's always followed by the statement, it's on the public domain. However, I'm not sure how to access it. And I believe it's the case for many of them. That's why for ECRI, we have created EcoRex, which is the ECOWAS observatory. And we are trying to make it into a great platform and tool for energy stakeholders. Now we can expand it to include other data for the sectors that we are interested in. We must also look to make sure that we put great emphasis on harmonization. Since this is a regional program and ECRI is a regional body, it should be part of our strategy through this collaboration to ensure that companies can move easily across the region, because we have harmonized the different policies and regulations in agriculture, water, and energy. It shouldn't be difficult from a company to go from the Gambia to Burkina Faso to Mali if standards are harmonized and import and customs regulations are harmonized. Collaboration is key. That's the last point that I would like to make in this speech. In Arai's presentation, she highlighted the fact that Senegal has now exempted VAT for renewable energy technologies. Having been a critical stakeholder in that process through ECRI, as she said, this conversation started many, many years ago. And when we realized that we needed to institutionalize the process, ECRI led the creation of the multi-stakeholder platform. The success of the VAT being exempted is the work of this multi-stakeholder platform that we were involved in establishing and having it being institutionalized through the Ministry of Energy. These type of platforms involving private sector, policy and decision makers, civil society, are critical in moving us forward. And we must find a way to operationalize them, to make them, to enhance their capacity so they can play a critical role for the industry and moving the market forward. I would like to thank all of you again, and I'll catch you on the other side for more collaboration. Thank you.